My name is Fiona. I'm 38 years old, and last Christmas my family decided I wasn't worth remembering. I'd been looking forward to that Christmas for weeks. I'd finished a big project at work, bought thoughtful gifts, even baked the same ginger cookies my mother loved. When I walked into my parents' house, the smell of cinnamon and pine wrapped around me like old memories. Vanessa, my older sister, was arranging ornaments with her usual perfection. Luke, my younger brother, was cracking jokes in the kitchen. Everyone seemed cheerful until I noticed the tripod and the matching sweaters. Every year we took a family photo by the fireplace. It was our tradition. A picture-perfect moment my mother framed on the mantel. I set down my coat and smiled. "Let me grab my sweater so we can start." Vanessa didn't look up. "Oh," she said lightly, "we already took them." I froze. "Without me?" "It was just for the immediate family," she replied. I blinked, confused. I am immediate family. No one met my eyes. My mother fiddled with the lights on the tree. My father cleared his throat and said, "You were running late, honey. We didn't want to lose the daylight." I had arrived 5 minutes behind schedule, that was all. 5 minutes, and suddenly I was an outsider in my own family picture. I tried to laugh it off. "Well, maybe we can take another one. You can just add me in." Vanessa smiled the way people do when they're done pretending to care. "We'll see if there's time." There wasn't. Dinner felt like sitting at a stranger's table. The conversations flowed around me while I stirred mashed potatoes in silence. Luke talked about his new car, Vanessa bragged about her boutique's expansion, and my parents nodded proudly at both of them. When I mentioned the promotion I'd earned at the architecture firm, no one reacted. After dessert, I slipped out early, pretending I had work emails waiting. I drove home through quiet streets, the glow of Christmas lights blurring in my eyes. When I finally walked into my apartment, I checked my phone. Vanessa had already posted the family photo online, everyone smiling by the fire. My parents, my siblings, even Luke's new girlfriend. I stared at the image for a long time. There was a small space on the couch where I would have sat, cropped perfectly out of existence. The caption read, "Family is everything." Comments poured in, "Beautiful family. You all look so happy." Not a single person noticed I wasn't there. That night, I poured a glass of wine and scrolled through every picture again. Each one felt like proof that I didn't belong. Maybe they had always seen me this way. The quiet one, the middle child, the afterthought. As a kid, I was the one who built things, tree houses, Lego towers, paper bridges. Vanessa was the beauty, Luke was the charm, I was the practicality they never celebrated. When my father started his real estate company, I was the one who handled his spreadsheets and contracts behind the scenes. He called me his right hand, but somehow that hand never showed up in any of the photos on the wall. I stared at the empty frame on my own shelf, the one I'd meant to fill with last year's family picture. Instead, I printed the newest one, trimmed off the edges, and left the blank corner where I should have been. I taped it to the wall as a reminder. I told myself it didn't hurt, but it did. It hurt because family is supposed to include you even when it's inconvenient. It hurt because I'd given so much of my time, my effort, my loyalty, and they had erased me with a single click. Around midnight, I called my best friend Kayla. She answered half asleep but listened as I explained everything. "They left you out again?" she said. "Completely." Kayla was quiet for a moment, then said something that stuck with me. "Maybe it's time you stop waiting for them to see as your worth. Maybe it's time they see what happens when you stop giving it away." I didn't respond, but her words settled deep in my mind. The next morning, I woke up with a new kind of clarity. For years I'd been the peacemaker, the helper, the forgotten middle child. But if they could deliberately lock me out of their perfect little portrait, then maybe it was time I stopped protecting their picture-perfect lives. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and scrolled through the digital folders I kept for my father's business. I had every record, bank statements, property deeds, partnership contracts. I was the one who maintained them all, the invisible backbone of the family wealth. For the first time, I realized how much power that gave me. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but one thought pulsed clearly in my head. They had drawn their line in the sand, and I was finally ready to draw mine. That was the night I stopped being part of their picture and started planning my own frame. Nothing stings like watching your own family celebrate your absence. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone. Vanessa's post had already gathered hundreds of likes. People were gushing over how perfect our family looked. How blessed we were. No one realized one of those smiles was missing mine. I clicked through the comments, scrolling past names I'd grown up with. My mother's friends, Luke's coworkers, even old teachers. Each one praised the image like it was some shining portrait of love. My chest felt tight, not with anger, but with that cold numbness that comes when you finally see something for what it truly is. It wasn't just a photo, it was proof that I didn't matter to them anymore. When my father had started taking those annual pictures decades ago, he said it was to capture our family's growth. But all it captured now was how small my place had become. I opened last year's photo on my computer, me, standing awkwardly between Vanessa and Luke, holding a mug of cocoa, smiling because that's what I thought love looked like. Then I looked at this year's photo again, and the contrast was striking. The space where I'd been was filled by Vanessa's husband. Perfect symmetry, perfect erasure. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning my apartment just to keep my hands busy. Every sweep of the broom felt like I was trying to scrub out something that had burrowed under my skin. By noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Hope you made it home safe. Sorry we couldn't redo the photo. It was chaos. You know how mom gets. Love you." I stared at the message. Reread the words, "love you," and felt the hollowness behind them. They didn't love me, they loved having someone to compare themselves to. I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out the binder where I kept copies of my father's estate plans. I'd managed them for years, updating details whenever he bought new property or changed investments. He always said, "You're the only one who understands these numbers, Fiona." He was right. Vanessa and Luke never cared enough to learn. I wasn't thinking about revenge, not yet. I was thinking about fairness, about what my father had built, and who had actually helped him build it. Around evening, my friend Kayla came by with takeout and 2 bottles of cider. She plopped onto my couch and said, "Okay, I saw the post. Are we pretending that wasn't a declaration of war?" I forced a smile. Maybe they just didn't think. "Fiona," she said flatly. "They've been not thinking about you for years." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're not wrong." Kayla studied me for a moment, then said, "You've been the glue in that family forever. Maybe it's time to stop holding them together and let them see how fast things fall apart without you." Her words hit harder than I expected. I didn't answer right away. Later, after she left, I sat on the floor with the binder open in front of me. The papers felt heavy in my lap. The deeds, the trust documents, the signatures, all the invisible proof of my value. Every late night I spent balancing accounts while Vanessa was at galas and Luke was out celebrating his newest failed business idea. I realized then that I had already been keeping the family together, just not in the way they noticed. My father was getting older. His health had declined quietly over the past year. Vanessa only visited when she needed something. Luke only called when he was broke. I was the one who handled his appointments, his medications, his bills. I didn't do it for money. I did it because I loved him, but now that love felt tainted by everyone else's greed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph again. So I started writing. Not a letter, not a message, just thoughts. I wrote about every time they'd made me feel invisible. The birthdays they forgot. The holidays they canceled without telling me. The subtle ways they reminded me that I was different. And when I was done, I wrote one final sentence that made my pulse quicken. If they can erase me from a picture, maybe it's time I erase them from something that actually matters. The thought scared me at first. I wasn't a vindictive person, but there was something about being erased that changes you. It doesn't make you cruel, it makes you clear. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I ignored Vanessa's chirpy messages and Luke's forwarded memes. My mother called once to say, "You know your sister only meant well." I told her I was fine, but inside, I was anything but fine. I started paying closer attention to the estate files, particularly the parts that listed executors and beneficiaries. Vanessa's name appeared first, followed by Luke's, and then mine at the bottom, labeled secondary. It was a quiet reminder of how even paperwork had its hierarchy. But that would change. The next time I visited my father, I noticed Vanessa's voice echoing from his study. She was leaning over his desk, talking about simplifying the will. My father looked tired, distracted, nodding absently. I stayed in the hallway, unseen, listening. "Dad, it's just practical," Vanessa was saying. "You've done so much for Fiona already. Luke and I can handle things when the time comes." I clenched my fists. Handle things. That was her polite way of saying take everything. When she left, I stepped into the room and handed my father his medication. He smiled faintly, unaware of the storm brewing. "I trust you with everything, sweetheart," he said. And that's when I knew what I needed to do, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I went home that night, opened my laptop, and began researching estate law. I read for hours, cross-checking clauses, studying power of attorney forms. Every line I read made one thing clearer. If I didn't protect my father's legacy, Vanessa and Luke would devour it. By dawn, I had a plan. Not revenge. Not yet. Just protection of my father, of myself, of the years I'd spent being the only one who truly cared. If they could erase me from a photograph, I could erase them from a will. Silence was my armor, but revenge needed a voice. After a week of restless nights and cold dinners, something inside me shifted. For most of my life, I'd been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the listener, the one who absorbed every slight without protest. But the thing about silence is that it trains people to forget you have teeth. That morning, I woke up before sunrise, made coffee, and pulled out my father's estate binder again. Every page felt heavier now, as though it carried not just numbers, but memories. My father had built everything from the ground up: 2 houses, 3 properties, and a modest portfolio. It wasn't an empire, but it was security, legacy, and I had helped him manage every penny of it. Yet on paper, my place in all of it was small, too small. I thought back to Vanessa's words in his study. "We can handle things when the time comes." The more I replayed it, the more it burned. Handle things. I could see it already: Vanessa taking over, Luke wasting money, and my father's years of hard work disappearing under their greed. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit quietly while they rewrote the story of our family. That afternoon, I called my father's attorney, Mr. Carson. He had known our family for over 20 years and had always treated me kindly. When I told his secretary I needed a private appointment, she hesitated. "Your sister was here last week," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I need to come in." When I arrived, Carson greeted me with his usual calm smile, adjusting his glasses as he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "What can I do for you, Fiona?" I hesitated only for a moment before speaking. "I think my siblings are trying to manipulate my father into changing his estate plans." His expression darkened. "Go on." I explained everything: Vanessa's visit, her talk of simplifying, the way Luke had been hovering around lately, pretending to be helpful. Carson listened quietly, his pen resting on a yellow notepad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You've always been your father's most reliable child," he said. "I'm not surprised you're the one noticing this." "What can we do?" I asked. He folded his hands. "We can review the documents and ensure that your father's original intentions are preserved. If any unauthorized drafts have been made, I can have them voided. But we'll need to act carefully, quietly." Quietly. That word made me smile. Quiet had always been my default, but this time, it would be my disguise. I nodded. "I understand." Over the next week, Carson and I reviewed everything line by line, clause by clause. I brought in every email, invoice, and letter I had archived from the past 3 years. Together, we built a timeline showing that my father's original will was sound and voluntary. Any attempt to alter it without his full consent would be legally invalid. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control returning. Still, I couldn't let my family suspect anything. So I played the same role they'd always given me, the quiet, dependable daughter who stayed out of the spotlight. I sent polite group texts, commented, "Lovely," under Vanessa's photos, even liked Luke's posts about his latest business venture. It was exhausting, pretending not to see through them. At night, I'd sit by the window with my notes, the city lights glimmering below, and whisper to myself, "Not this time." One evening, I decided to visit my father. He looked frailer than I remembered, his skin pale, his voice softer, but when he smiled at me, it still carried warmth. "Vanessa tells me you've been distant," he said. "I've been busy, Dad. Work's been crazy." He nodded, not pressing further. "I'm glad you're doing well. You've always been my steady one." Those words caught me off guard. My steady one. It was all the validation I needed. When I left his house, I walked past Vanessa's car in the driveway. She was on the phone, laughing, her hand waving as if she owned the world. She didn't even glance at me. That was fine. Soon, she'd realize ownership was something she'd have to earn. I went home and began drafting a summary for Carson notes of everything my siblings had said in the past few months about money, inheritance, or future plans. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't invent. I simply documented. Truth, after all, doesn't need embellishment, it just needs exposure. The more I wrote, the calmer I felt. This wasn't just retaliation anymore. It was justice. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was trying to stop them from hurting what mattered most, my father's legacy. A few days later, Carson called. "I've confirmed your suspicions," he said. "Your sister's been consulting with another lawyer. She's asked for a draft that reallocates assets under her management, citing your father's verbal consent." My pulse quickened. "Can she do that?" "Not legally," he replied. "Not unless your father signs it. But if he's being influenced, that's another matter entirely." I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking. Vanessa had crossed the line from selfish to dangerous. That night, I didn't sleep. I made a new folder on my computer labeled Protection. Inside, I saved scanned copies of every document Carson had verified, along with time-stamped photos, emails, and receipts. If Vanessa or Luke tried anything, there would be no dispute about what was real. By dawn, the fear that had haunted me for weeks had transformed into something sharper. Focus, purpose. The next morning, I called Carson again. "I want to move forward," I told him. "I want my father's true wishes locked down permanently." He didn't hesitate. "Then that's what we'll do." As I hung up, I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. For years, that reflection had belonged to a woman who stayed quiet to keep the peace. But the woman staring back at me now wasn't quiet anymore. She was ready. For the first time, I wasn't protecting the family, I was protecting myself from them. When people think you're weak, they never notice you loading the weapon. From the outside, I was still the same old Fiona, the quiet, dependable daughter who stayed in the background. That was the beauty of my disguise. My family had spent decades underestimating me, and I intended to let them keep doing exactly that. Vanessa and Luke believed the world revolved around their charm. They were used to being loud, flashy, and adored. I had been invisible for so long that my invisibility became my greatest strength. It started with small moves. I stopped answering Vanessa's calls right away, letting her messages pile up before replying with short, polite responses. When she bragged about her new house renovation or her husband's business trip, I simply said, "That's nice." It drove her crazy that she couldn't get a reaction out of me. Meanwhile, I was making progress with Mr. Carson. We finalized updates that would preserve my father's wishes no matter what manipulation my siblings tried. I became executor not by trickery, but by trust. My father signed the necessary documents willingly, grateful that someone finally handled things responsibly. I didn't tell Vanessa or Luke. Let them believe they were still in control. When I visited my parents' house, Vanessa was there, of course. She was helping organize files in Dad's office, which really meant snooping through drawers for anything that could prove useful later. I walked in and smiled. "Need a hand?" I asked. She jumped, flustered. "Oh, Fiona, no, I'm just helping Dad organize some of the old stuff. You know how messy he gets." I glanced at the papers scattered across the desk. Most were duplicates of the files I'd already secured. "That's thoughtful of you," I said smoothly. "He must appreciate it." Vanessa gave me a tight smile. She wasn't used to being on edge around me, and she didn't like it. Later that evening, my father and I sat together in the living room. His eyes were tired, but his voice was steady. "Your sister means well," he said. "Of course," I replied, forcing a small smile. "She's always been good at taking charge." He chuckled faintly. "And you've always been the one keeping everything together behind the scenes." I squeezed his hand. I want you to be at peace, Dad. You've worked too hard for things to get messy." He nodded slowly. "That's why I trust you, sweetheart." Those words were enough. Trust was all I needed, and now I had it documented. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa started pushing harder. She organized family meetings, claiming we needed to plan ahead. At each one, she subtly tried to steer the conversation toward her version of control. "Dad, you shouldn't stress about details," she'd say sweetly. "Just let me handle the estate. You can relax." Luke nodded like a loyal sidekick, though his motives were simpler. He wanted money. He'd recently invested in a tech startup, which was just another way of saying he was broke again. I stayed quiet during those meetings, nodding at all the right times, pretending to agree. Every now and then, I'd glance at my father's face, confused, weary. I knew he didn't want conflict. That's why I had to handle this quietly, efficiently, and without emotion. One evening, after another exhausting planning dinner, Vanessa cornered me in the kitchen. Her smile was too wide to be genuine. "You've been awfully quiet lately," she said. "Everything okay?" I rinsed a dish and shrugged. "Just tired." She leaned closer. "Good. I'd hate for there to be tension. You know how delicate these things can get." Delicate. That was her favorite word when she wanted to sound civilized while twisting the knife. I smiled politely. "Of course, Vanessa. I'm sure everything will turn out the way it's meant to." She gave me a long, suspicious look before walking away. I waited until she was gone, then exhaled. I was tired of being underestimated, but I wasn't done using it. Behind the scenes, I started quietly shifting files into the foundation account my father had mentioned years ago. He'd wanted part of his wealth to go to scholarships and housing programs. Vanessa had called it a waste. I made sure it was now protected under legal supervision that required my signature as executor. Luke texted me around that time. "Vanessa says you've been acting weird. Everything good?" I replied. "Everything's fine. Just busy with Dad's paperwork." He didn't need to know what kind of paperwork. A week later, Mr. Carson called to confirm that all estate protections had been officially recorded. My siblings could no longer make changes or pressure my father into new drafts without my authorization. "Everything's sealed tight now," he said. "Even if they try, it won't hold up legally." I thanked him and hung up, my heart pounding with a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I never wanted to fight my family, but I'd been given no choice. They'd pushed me out of their circle, out of their lives, and now they'd pushed me into strength. The next family dinner was different. Vanessa hosted it at her house, all glass and white furniture, her pride and joy. I arrived right on time. She greeted me with fake warmth, Luke gave me a half hug, and my parents sat awkwardly at the end of the table. Conversation flowed easily at first, small talk, wine, compliments about the decor. But halfway through dinner, Vanessa leaned back and said, "Dad, I talked to a financial advisor. I think we should revisit your estate plans soon." My fork froze mid-air. My father frowned slightly. "I already went over everything with Carson and Fiona." Vanessa blinked. "You did?" He nodded. "She's the executor now. Everything's updated." The silence that followed was heavy. Luke looked confused. Vanessa's jaw tightened. I just smiled, took a sip of water, and said softly, "Yes, everything's in good order." Vanessa tried to recover, forcing a laugh. "Oh, I didn't realize that was finalized." My father shrugged. "You've got enough on your plate, dear. Fiona can handle it." I looked down at my plate to hide my grin. For once, it felt like the universe had handed me the perfect line without effort. Dinner continued, but the tone had changed. Vanessa picked at her food. Luke barely spoke. When I stood to leave, I kissed my father on the cheek and said, "Good night, Dad. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." Vanessa didn't meet my eyes. Outside, the cold air hit my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not loud, not cruel, just quiet and certain. They mistook my silence for surrender, but silence is just the sound strategy makes before it strikes. You can tell a lot about people by what they say when they think they've already won. It was a Thursday night when Vanessa invited us all for one last big family dinner before things officially change. That wording alone told me everything I needed to know. She thought she had already secured control over the estate, over our father, over the entire narrative of our family. I accepted the invitation immediately. Not because I wanted to sit through another evening of her smug smiles, but because I needed to watch her reveal herself. People like Vanessa always do. Her house looked like something from a magazine, glossy marble counters, a chandelier that screamed self-importance, candles lit even though it wasn't dark yet. Luke was already there, laughing too loudly, wine glass in hand. My mother sat rigid on the couch, pretending everything was fine. When I walked in, Vanessa gave me a kiss on the cheek, the air kind of affection that barely touched skin. "Fiona, you look lovely," she said. "Thank you," I replied. "So do you." She smiled too wide. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Things have been a little tense lately." "Not at all," I said calmly. "Everything's been perfectly civil." She tilted her head, studying me, probably trying to read my tone. But I didn't give her anything to work with. Years of being overlooked had made me an expert at neutrality. Dinner was extravagant: prime rib, truffle potatoes, roasted vegetables. Vanessa liked to host like she was auditioning for a reality show. I noticed how she kept glancing at my father, gauging his reactions, always steering the conversation toward her achievements. "So, Dad," she said between bites, "I've been thinking a lot about your investments. It might make sense to consolidate the properties under one management account. You know, just to make things easier." Luke nodded. Mouth full. "Yeah. And less paperwork for Fiona, right?" I smiled faintly, stabbing a piece of carrot with my fork. "Don't worry about my workload. I manage fine." Vanessa waved a manicured hand. "Of course you do, dear. But with all your projects at work, we wouldn't want you to feel overwhelmed. Luke and I can take on more responsibility." I met her gaze, calm and steady. "Dad's already made arrangements. There's no need for any changes." Her smile faltered just slightly, but she recovered fast. "Oh? I thought he was still reviewing a few things." My father looked up from his plate, his brow furrowed. "No, everything's finalized with Carson. Fiona handled it." The silence that followed was almost delicious. Luke looked like he'd swallowed a bone. Vanessa froze, wineglass hovering halfway to her lips. "Oh," she said after a beat, her tone sugar-coated. "Well, that's..." My mother tried to fill the gaps with polite conversation, but the tension hung thick in the air. Vanessa's confidence had cracked, and Luke kept stealing glances at her like a nervous co-conspirator. After dessert, Vanessa suggested we all move to the sitting room for coffee and business talk. I followed, hiding the faint smile tugging at my lips. She brought out a leather folder and placed it on the coffee table. "Dad, this is just a small proposal I've been working on. A simple update to your charitable donations and..." My father held up a hand, Vanessa, I told you. Fiona and Carson have it covered. She forced a laugh. Of course. But this is just a suggestion. Before she could finish, my father leaned back, weary. Enough, Vanessa. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The air went still. Even Luke stopped fidgeting. I watched her face, saw the tiny twitch at the corner of her jaw as she swallowed her pride. For once, she didn't have a comeback. She closed the folder, smiling stiffly. Of course, Dad. I just wanted to help. He sighed. You've both done enough. I trust Fiona with the details. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Every word he spoke was a quiet victory. Later that evening, when my father went to bed and my mother started cleaning up, Vanessa cornered me by the sink. You've really been busy, haven't you? She said in a low voice. Just doing my part, I replied. Her eyes narrowed. You think you've won something, don't you? I dried a glass slowly, letting her words hang in the air. I didn't realize this was a competition. She stepped closer. Dad's not going to live forever, Fiona. And when he's gone, you'll wish you hadn't played these games. I turned to face her, calm and deliberate. The only game I've ever played was survival. You're the one who made it personal. Her expression hardened, but before she could answer, Luke stumbled in, drunk and clumsy. You two fighting again? Just chatting, I said, setting the glass down. But I think I'll head home. As I walked out, Vanessa called after me, her voice tight with forced politeness. Drive safe, Fiona. I didn't look back. The night air was cold and sharp. As I walked to my car, I could see their silhouettes through the dining room window, Vanessa pacing, Luke sitting with his head in his hands. I imagined their whispered conversation, their frustration, their confusion. They had no idea how deep my preparations went. When I got home, I poured myself a small glass of wine and opened my laptop. An unread email from Carson waited in my inbox. The subject line made my heart race. Final confirmation filed. I opened it. Every document was there, signed, sealed, notarized. My father's original wishes, my role as executor, the protected charitable distributions. It was all official now, irreversible. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Safe, but not sorry. They had excluded me from their picture. Now, I had excluded them from everything that picture stood to gain. By the time the cameras flashed again, they wouldn't be smiling. I didn't rewrite my father's legacy, I just made sure they couldn't ruin it. 2 weeks after that dinner, my father passed away quietly in his sleep. It was a cold morning in February. Gray light slipping through the curtains when my mother called me. Her voice trembling. He's gone, Fiona. For a moment, everything inside me went still. I knew it was coming. His health had been failing for months, but knowing doesn't make it easier. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the phone, listening to her cry. I'll take care of everything, I said softly. And I did. The days that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements, paperwork, and condolences. My siblings were everywhere, Vanessa taking control of the flower orders and guest list like she was planning a corporate event, and Luke making sure everyone saw how devastated he was. I stayed quiet, doing the work no one else wanted to do, coordinating with the funeral director, dealing with bills, helping Mom manage her grief. Mr. Carson came by the second evening to check on me. I know this is difficult, he said gently. But your father's estate needs to move forward soon. The documents are in place. We'll begin the process next week. I nodded. I'm ready. Vanessa wasn't. She didn't even wait for the funeral to start her scheming. The day before the service, she called me out of nowhere. I was thinking, she began, maybe we should wait before handling any legal stuff. It's too soon. I could hear the real meaning under her words. She wasn't ready for the truth to come out. I understand, I said calmly. But everything's already scheduled. Dad would have wanted things to be handled properly. Silence stretched on the line before she muttered, "Of course," and hung up. The funeral was beautiful, quiet, intimate, full of people who truly cared about my father. I sat beside my mother, holding her hand while Vanessa cried loud enough for everyone to hear. Luke stayed glued to his phone, probably texting friends about how hard the day was for him. After the service, I stayed behind for a while. The last of the guests had left. The flowers were starting to droop, and the air smelled of rain and lilies. I knelt beside the casket and whispered, "It's done, Dad. Everything you built is safe now. I promise." A few days later, Mr. Carson called a meeting at his office. "We'll read the will formally this Friday," he said. "Your siblings have been notified." I could tell from his tone that he was already anticipating the chaos. That Friday, the three of us sat in the polished oak conference room, the air so tense it could have cracked. Vanessa wore a black blazer and fake composure. Luke fidgeted beside her, trying to look serious. Mr. Carson greeted us politely before opening his briefcase. "Your father's final will and testament was signed and notarized last month. He was of sound mind and body at the time, witnessed by 2 independent parties." Vanessa shifted in her chair. "Wait, last month? I thought he finalized everything years ago." Carson didn't even glance up. "He reviewed it regularly, but this is the official version he approved most recently." Luke frowned. "Why weren't we told?" "Because it wasn't necessary," Carson replied smoothly. He entrusted Fiona to manage the updates. The silence that followed was thick. Vanessa's head turned toward me, her smile strained and sharp. "You?" "Yes," I said simply. Carson continued, reading aloud the clauses that confirmed every detail: my father's donations to charity, the preservation of the scholarship fund, and my role as sole executor. My siblings would each receive a modest inheritance, enough to be fair, but not enough to control. Vanessa's knuckles whitened. "This must be a mistake. My father wouldn't." Carson cut her off gently but firmly. "Your father was clear in his intentions. He wanted fairness and stability. He praised Fiona's integrity and asked that she oversee his legacy personally." Luke tried to speak next, voice rising. "This doesn't make sense." "She must have influenced him. She's been handling his finances." Carson turned a cold gaze toward him. "Mr. Morgan, your father's wishes were reviewed independently. There is no question of coercion or manipulation. Everything was done lawfully." Vanessa looked like she'd swallowed glass. Luke just slumped back in his chair. I stayed quiet, my hands folded neatly on the table. There was nothing left to say. Carson finished reading, closed the folder, and said, "This concludes the legal reading of the will." For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Vanessa let out a shaky laugh. "Well," she said bitterly, "I suppose congratulations are in order." I met her gaze evenly. "It's not about winning, Vanessa. It's about honoring Dad's wishes." Her jaw tightened. "You always were the favorite." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "No. I was the one who listened." When I left the office, the winter air hit my face like freedom. The sun was low, and the world felt strangely quiet, as if the noise of years of resentment had finally died down. That evening, I went home and poured myself a cup of tea. For the first time in months, I didn't feel tense. There were no more secrets left to guard, no more documents to hide. My father's legacy was locked in stone, just as he intended. But I also knew this peace wouldn't last. Vanessa and Luke weren't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Sure enough, the next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. "You think this is over?" "It's not." I stared at the words for a long time before replying. "You're right. It's only over for the people who can't move on." I set my phone down, took a slow breath, and smiled faintly. They'd locked me out of their family picture. But now, the frame, the estate, the legacy, the power was mine to protect. They had no idea the real memorial would happen in a lawyer's office. Nothing humbles arrogance faster than legal paper. The day of the official reading felt heavier than the funeral. Funerals were emotional, wills were revealing. You can hide your grief behind tears, but you can't hide your character when money and power are at stake. I arrived at Mr. Carson's office early, wearing the same black dress I'd worn at the service. My mother was already there, sitting quietly near the window, hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, like life had deflated her. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "Your father trusted you, Fiona," she said softly. "He told me you'd do what's right. I'll honor him," I promised. A few minutes later, the door opened. Vanessa swept in first, dressed sharply in a navy pantsuit, carrying herself like she owned the building. Luke followed behind her, trying too hard to look composed, though his red eyes betrayed a late night. Vanessa gave me a thin smile. "I suppose congratulations are in order. You've been very involved lately." I met her gaze evenly. "Just trying to keep things organized." Mr. Carson entered then, holding a leather folder. "Good morning, everyone," he said, motioning toward the seats. "I appreciate you all being here promptly. This is never easy, but your father's final wishes are clear." Saturday, the sound of papers shuffling was the only noise for a moment. Carson adjusted his glasses and began reading. "I, Howard Morgan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament." Vanessa sat straighter, ready to pounce on every word. Luke leaned forward, anxious. I sat back, silent, steady. Carson continued, outlining my father's charitable contributions first. A portion of his estate was allocated to scholarships and housing programs, a cause he'd been passionate about for years. I saw my mother's eyes glisten with pride. Then came the distribution of personal assets. The house, the investments, the business shares. Vanessa's confident expression began to waver as Carson read each line. "To my daughter, Fiona Morgan," he said clearly, "I appoint you as sole executor of my estate and trustee of the Morgan Family Foundation. You will oversee all distributions as outlined here, with full authority to ensure my intentions are honored." Vanessa blinked rapidly. "Excuse me, what?" Carson didn't look up. "Your father selected Fiona as executor." Luke's head snapped toward me. "You knew about this?" I kept my tone calm. "He told me he wanted things to run smoothly." Carson continued reading, listing small inheritances for both of them, a trust for Luke, modest but secure, and a smaller inheritance for Vanessa, tied to her boutique's business debt. It wasn't punishment, it was fairness. My father had been kind, but not blind. Vanessa let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're kidding." "That's it?" Carson set the papers down, finally meeting her eyes. "Your father's exact words were, 'My children will receive what they've earned.'" Her smile vanished. "He didn't mean it like this. Fiona manipulated him. She's been handling everything lately, she probably got him to change it." "Mrs. Dawson," Carson said, his voice firm but polite, "your father's final revision was completed in my presence." He was lucid, deliberate, and adamant about his decisions. There was no influence. Vanessa turned to me, eyes blazing. "You planned this, didn't you?" "All those meetings with Carson, how convenient." I met her stare, unflinching. "If by planned you mean making sure Dad's wishes were respected, then yes." "I did." Luke slammed his hand on the table. "This isn't right, we're family. We should have equal shares." Carson's patience thinned. "Your father's instructions were based on merit and responsibility, not equality. He trusted Fiona because she managed his affairs faithfully for over a decade." Vanessa stood up, trembling with anger. "This is a setup. I'm calling my lawyer." Carson calmly handed her a sealed envelope. "This is a notarized copy. You're free to review it with any counsel you wish. But I can assure you, no lawyer will find grounds to challenge it." The room fell silent again. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. My mother wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice trembling as she said, "Your father wanted peace. Please, don't turn this into a war." Vanessa didn't answer. She just gathered her purse, shoved her chair back, and stormed out. Luke followed, muttering curses under his breath. When the door closed behind them, the air seemed to lighten. Carson looked at me and sighed. "That went about as expected." I nodded. "They won't stop here." "No," he agreed, "but you're prepared." My mother touched my arm gently. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Your father would be proud." I smiled faintly. I hope so. After they left, I stayed. Behind a few minutes, alone in the quiet conference room, I glanced at the folder Carson had left on the table. Inside was my father's handwritten letter, short, steady, unmistakably his. Fiona, you were always my compass. You'll know how to guide what I've built. Keep it safe from greed, from pride, and even from family. Love, Dad. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside. It wasn't wealth he'd given me, it was responsibility. When I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun hit the windows, reflecting off the glass towers around me. I could almost feel my father's steady hand on my shoulder, silent but reassuring. As I walked to my car, I saw Vanessa standing by hers, furiously typing on her phone. She looked up when she noticed me. "This isn't over," she said coldly. I unlocked my car, my voice quiet but certain. "No, Vanessa. It is. You just don't realize it yet." I drove away before she could reply, watching the city blur past. For years, I'd been invisible. Now, they could see me but only as the reflection of their own undoing. For once, I didn't need to speak, the law spoke for me. The louder they shouted, the more the truth echoed. It didn't take long for the storm to begin. By the next morning, Vanessa had turned into a whirlwind of fury, and Luke followed right behind her like smoke after fire. I woke up to a dozen missed calls, angry texts, and one message from my mother that simply read, "Please, don't respond yet." But silence was my choice, not my weakness. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, letting the sunlight pour across the floor while my phone buzzed non-stop. Their anger was predictable, almost rehearsed. Vanessa hated losing control, and Luke hated losing money. Between the two of them, I was the perfect villain to blame. By noon, the family group chat had exploded. "Vanessa, you took advantage of Dad while he was sick." Luke, "Unbelievable. How do you sleep at night?" Vanessa again, "We'll make sure everyone knows what you did." I didn't reply to any of it. Instead, I texted Carson. "They're getting aggressive," I wrote. He responded almost immediately. "Let them. Nothing they do will hold up. The documents are airtight." Airtight. That word gave me comfort. Still, the next few days weren't easy. Vanessa started calling my mother non-stop, pretending to be concerned, but really fishing for information. Luke went further, posting cryptic messages online about betrayal within family. The local gossip circles in our small community picked it up almost instantly. Within 48 hours, I was painted as the cold-hearted daughter who stole everything from her grieving siblings. Kayla came over one night, scrolling through her phone, shaking her head. "They've made you into the villain, Fee. But honestly, it's backfiring. People are starting to ask why they're attacking you so publicly." I sighed. "They're desperate. They thought the money would fix everything. Now they don't know who to be without it." She smiled faintly. "You, on the other hand, look like someone who just found her peace." I laughed softly. Peace with a side of defamation. The next week, Vanessa went even further. She contacted a journalist. I found out when an online article appeared titled, "Family Feud Over Estate Sparks Tension." My name wasn't mentioned directly, but the quotes made it obvious who the quiet, manipulative daughter was supposed to be. Carson called me immediately. "We can take legal action if this continues," he said. "No," I replied. "Let her talk. She's doing more damage to herself than to me." And I was right. Within days, the story began unraveling. People started digging, real reporters this time. They discovered my father's long-standing relationship with the charities, his handwritten statements about his wishes, even his previous interviews where he'd said, "My daughter Fiona is my rock." Suddenly, the narrative shifted. The charity board released a public thank you, praising me for honoring his legacy exactly as he'd intended. They posted photos of the scholarship recipients and community programs the estate had already begun funding. The contrast between those smiling faces and Vanessa's bitterness online couldn't have been clearer. Kayla sent me a screenshot of the comments section under Vanessa's post. Maybe stop blaming your sister for your own greed. This is embarrassing. She's helping people. Imagine turning a will into a PR stunt. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just sat quietly, staring at the words on my screen, realizing how far I'd come from that woman they once ignored in family photos. A week later, Vanessa called. Her voice was icy, brittle, holding back tears. You've ruined me, she hissed. No, Vanessa, I said calmly. You did that yourself. She hung up without another word. Luke tried next. His approach was different, less rage, more guilt. I just don't understand why you couldn't share, he said over the phone. It's family, Fiona. I took a deep breath. I did share. I shared my time, my effort, my life taking care of Dad while you were busy chasing business ideas. This is just me finally taking what I earned. He didn't respond. When I checked later, he'd blocked my number. For the first time in months, my house was completely quiet. No calls, no texts, no noise, just peace. I spent those days focusing on what mattered. With Carson's guidance, I finalized the first official donation from the estate, a new library wing at my father's alma mater. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small and dignified. I stood by the plaque engraved with his name and whispered, "We did it, Dad." Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, a woman approached me. She was a volunteer from one of the funded shelters. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "Your father's contribution is going to help so many people. You're doing something good here." Her words washed over me like sunlight. It wasn't validation, it was peace. That night, I went home and scrolled through social media again. Vanessa had deleted her angry posts. Luke's account was deactivated. My mother had posted a photo of my father with the caption, "He left his legacy in good hands." I closed my phone and smiled. They had tried to bury me under their accusations, but they'd forgotten something important: truth doesn't rot. It stays rooted, waiting for light. I made myself another cup of coffee, stood by the same window where it all began, and finally let myself breathe without tension. I wasn't just the quiet one anymore. I was the voice of my father's memory, and no lie could silence that. They tried to shame me in daylight, but my truth was brighter. They thought dragging me to court would break me, forgetting I built my life on blueprints and patience. It had been nearly 2 months since the will was read, and I had started to believe the chaos was finally behind me. The estate was settled, the charity was thriving, and for the first time in years, I felt free from my family's manipulation. Then, one morning, I opened my door to find a courier holding a thick envelope. "Delivery for Fiona Morgan," he said. My stomach sank as soon as I saw the sender's name, Vanessa Dawson, via her attorney. Inside were the words I had expected but still dreaded: notice of intent to file suit. She and Luke were accusing me of undue influence, emotional manipulation, and fraud in connection to our father's will. I set the papers on my kitchen counter and stared at them, the weight of years of family resentment wrapped in legal jargon. When I called Carson, his voice was calm. "They finally did it," he said. I wondered how long it would take. "They're claiming I pressured Dad," I said. He chuckled dryly. "Let them claim. They have no evidence. Everything we filed is documented and witnessed." Still, part of me ached, not for fear of losing, but because my own blood was trying to destroy what was left of our father's peace. The next few weeks were consumed by court filings, affidavits, and endless paperwork. I met with Carson regularly. He reassured me every step of the way. "They're grasping at straws, Fiona. Judges see these kinds of sibling disputes all the time." But even knowing that, walking into the courthouse for the first hearing made my pulse race. Vanessa was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table in a fitted suit, her expression icy. Luke sat beside her, fidgeting, clearly uncomfortable. She looked at me when I entered, her lips curling into a smirk. "I guess you're not so untouchable after all." I met her gaze evenly. "Neither are you." When we sat again, Carson opened with calm precision. He laid out the evidence: my father's medical reports proving he was of sound mind, the notarized documents, the independent witnesses. When it was Vanessa's attorney's turn, the tone shifted from law to drama. He painted me as a manipulative daughter who took advantage of an aging father's trust. Every word was designed to sting, to make me look like a heartless schemer. But I stayed quiet. Every accusation rolled off me like rain against glass. Then Carson stood again, presenting a binder filled with dated records, emails, letters, receipts, even video clips of my father thanking me for handling his affairs. "These," Carson said, "are not the actions of a coerced man. These are the words of a father who trusted his daughter completely." He played a short clip in court. My father's voice filled the room, gravelly but warm. "Fiona's been my rock through everything. I don't know what I'd do without her keeping me straight." The courtroom fell silent. For the first time, Vanessa looked uncertain. Luke's head dropped, avoiding eye contact altogether. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was clear and firm. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony. There is no credible indication of undue influence or fraud. This case is dismissed with prejudice." Dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. The words echoed like a door slamming shut on years of cruelty. Vanessa stood abruptly. "You can't just—" The judge raised a hand. "This court has ruled. Miss Dawson, I advise you to accept it and move on." She sat down hard, fury burning in her eyes. Luke just stared blankly, as if realizing for the first time what they'd lost, not money, but dignity. When the gavel struck, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Carson turned to me, smiling. "Told you. They didn't stand a chance." Outside, the air felt crisp and alive. Reporters waited on the courthouse steps, their cameras ready. Someone shouted, "Miss Morgan, any comment?" I paused, then said simply, "Justice doesn't require noise. It just requires truth." That quote would end up in the local paper the next morning, printed under a photo of me walking down the courthouse steps. It wasn't intentional, but I suppose it summed up everything I'd learned. Vanessa disappeared from sight after that day. Her boutique closed quietly a few months later. Luke sold his house and moved 2 towns over. Neither of them spoke to me again. My mother, though, called the evening after the verdict. Her voice trembled. "You did what had to be done," she said. "Your father would have been proud of how you stood your ground." "I didn't want to fight them," I admitted, "but they left me no choice." "I know," she whispered. "And you fought the right way." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, without guilt. A week later, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Vanessa's. Inside was a single sentence written in blue ink. "I hope you're happy." I folded the note carefully and placed it in my drawer, not out of sentiment but as a reminder. Because happiness wasn't what I'd gained, it was freedom. For years, I'd been the quiet daughter, the overlooked one, the woman erased from family photos. But in that courtroom, I had reclaimed every piece of myself they'd tried to silence. As I watched the sunset that evening, golden light flooding through my window, I whispered to no one in particular, "You can't win against the truth." And I meant it. They lost the case and the last piece of me they could ever control. They thought dragging me to court would break me, forgetting I built my life on blueprints and patience. I always thought that after the will was settled, the chaos would end. I had fulfilled my father's wishes, honored his legacy, and found peace in silence. But my siblings had other plans. For Vanessa and Luke, defeat wasn't a lesson, it was an injury to their pride. And wounded pride has a nasty habit of looking for revenge. It started with rumors, whispers in our small town that I had tricked my father, that I'd taken advantage of him while he was sick. I ignored them at first. Gossip is like smoke, it fades when there's no air to feed it. But then came the official letter. A thick, cream-colored envelope slid through my mail slot one morning. Inside was a legal notice stamped in bold, "Intent to file suit." Vanessa and Luke had decided to sue me. They accused me of manipulating our father, of coercing him into naming me executor, of cutting them out of what was rightfully theirs. It was absurd. Everything had been signed, witnessed, and notarized under Mr. Carson's supervision. But they weren't chasing truth, they were chasing humiliation. They wanted to drag me through the mud just to watch me flinch. When I called Carson, he wasn't surprised. I expected this, he said calmly. People who lose control often try to win it back with noise. They'll embarrass themselves, I said. He chuckled. Yes, but not before they embarrass themselves publicly. He was right. Within a week, local reporters had caught wind of the story. Headlines popped up online, siblings battle over family fortune. They made it sound like I was some greedy villain hoarding wealth while my poor siblings suffered. I stayed silent. Every interview request, every phone call, I ignored them all. I knew the truth didn't need to shout. The first hearing was held on a Tuesday morning. The courthouse was cold, marble echoing under my heels as I walked in. Vanessa was already there, dressed in expensive navy, pretending composure. Luke sat beside her, trying to look serious but clearly out of his depth. They both looked up when I entered. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You must be enjoying this," she said quietly. I met her gaze. "I don't enjoy seeing my family destroy itself," she smirked. "You'll change your tune when you lose." Mr. Carson placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Don't engage," he whispered. "Let the evidence speak." When the hearing began, Vanessa's lawyer took center stage. He was sharp-tongued, theatrical. The kind of man who believed volume could replace facts. He painted me as a manipulative daughter who isolated her father and rewrote history. At one point he said, "Miss Morgan exploited her father's failing health to secure power and wealth for herself." Carson rose smoothly. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to submit into evidence the medical reports from the time of the signing signed by 2 doctors, confirming Mr. Morgan was mentally sound and fully capable of decision-making." The judge took the papers, flipping through them. Vanessa's lawyer hesitated. Carson continued, his voice calm but cutting. "We also have video correspondence, emails, and letters written by Mr. Morgan himself, all confirming that Fiona acted as his assistant, not his manipulator. The plaintiff's claims have no factual foundation." Then he pulled out one final piece of evidence, a handwritten note from my father addressed to Carson himself. The judge read it aloud. "Fiona has always been my pillar. My decisions are my own. I trust her with my life and my legacy." The courtroom went silent. I didn't look at Vanessa, but I could feel her shaking beside her lawyer. Luke had gone pale. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was steady. "The evidence shows no indication of fraud or coercion. The plaintiff's claims are without merit. This case is dismissed with prejudice." Dismissed with prejudice. Those 3 words felt like air after drowning. It meant they could never bring the same case again, ever. The gavel hit the bench, sharp and final. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Luke muttered something under his breath. Carson leaned toward me and whispered, "Told you it never stood a chance." As we left the courtroom, a reporter called out, "Miss Morgan, any comment?" I stopped for just a second and said, "The truth doesn't need to be defended, it just needs to be proven." That quote ended up on the front page of the local paper the next day. People stopped whispering. The rumor mill died. The story flipped from scandal to respect. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain, I was the daughter who protected her father's will from greed. Vanessa, on the other hand, vanished from social media within days. Her boutique shut down a few months later. Luke tried to start a new business, but without access to inheritance money, he failed quickly. I didn't feel satisfaction watching their downfall, just a strange emptiness. Winning a war you never wanted doesn't feel like victory, it feels like cleanup. My mother called me that evening, her voice trembling. "They were wrong to drag you through this," she said. "I know. I just wish your father could have seen how strong you were." I smiled faintly. He already knew. After we hung up, I sat by the window. The same spot where I'd once stared at that family photo that excluded me. Now, it didn't hurt anymore. It almost made me laugh how their attempt to erase me had ended with them erasing themselves. That night, I filed away the court papers with my other documents. I labeled the folder Resolution. For once, the word didn't feel like an ending. It felt like peace. Outside, the world was quiet. No phone buzzing, no angry texts, no noise, just calm. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down, and whispered, "You can't win against truth, Dad. We proved that." And deep inside, I knew it wasn't just about law, it was about dignity. Because while they had tried to take everything from me, all I'd really done was protect what was already mine: integrity. They lost the case and the last piece of me they could ever control. The woman they cropped out of every photo became the face of their father's legacy. It's strange how fast public opinion can turn. Months earlier, I'd been the invisible one, the sister erased from the family picture, the quiet daughter nobody noticed. But once the lawsuit ended, once the truth settled like dust after a storm, the silence around me changed. People started calling. Reporters, charities, community organizers, all of them wanted to talk about my father's legacy and the foundation I now managed. They wanted photos, interviews, statements. I hesitated at first. I wasn't doing this for attention. But then I remembered how easily stories can be twisted when the wrong people tell them. If my family had tried to define me with lies, maybe it was time I defined myself with truth. The first time a journalist visited the Fiona Foundation, I nearly canceled. It felt strange, letting someone point a camera at me after years of avoiding it. I wasn't the kind of woman who smiled easily for photos. But when the photographer asked me to stand beside the new plaque bearing my father's name, I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said quietly. The flash went off, and just like that, a new picture existed, a picture that told the real story. The article that followed ran with the headline, "Daughter Honors Late Father's Legacy Through Foundation Work." It focused on the scholarships, the housing projects, and the lives being changed. Not a single mention of scandal, lawsuits, or betrayal. Just compassion. The photograph showed me standing under sunlight, the foundation logo behind me, a genuine smile on my face. When I saw it online, I didn't cry. I just stared at it for a long time, realizing that after all these years, I had finally taken up space in a picture that mattered. Kayla called that evening. "You look incredible," she said. Confident, peaceful. "I wasn't trying to," I told her. "I just wanted to look honest." "Well," she said with a laugh, "it suits you better than fear ever did." She was right. The following months brought more interviews, carefully chosen, of course. I wasn't interested in fame, only in telling my father's real story. The cameras captured moments that used to feel impossible. Me cutting ribbons at charity events, speaking to students about integrity, shaking hands with community leaders. Every photo reminded me of that Christmas when Vanessa had excluded me from the family portrait. Back then, I thought being invisible was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now, I realized invisibility had been my protection. It gave me time to become the kind of woman who no longer needed their approval. One afternoon, the local news station asked to do a short segment about the scholarship program. They filmed me walking through the foundation offices, talking about my father's vision. At one point, the interviewer said, "You've been through a lot of public criticism. How did you find the strength to keep going?" I paused, then answered truthfully. "When people try to erase you, you learn that your story only disappears if you stop telling it. My father taught me to build things that last. This foundation is my way of keeping him alive." The anchor smiled. "That's beautiful, Fiona." When the segment aired, messages poured in from strangers, people who'd lost loved ones, people who'd been betrayed by family, people who just needed hope. One woman wrote, "You made me believe it's possible to reclaim your dignity, even after the people closest to you try to take it." I printed that message and kept it in my office drawer. On hard days, it reminded me why I kept moving forward. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Luke stayed silent. Their names had vanished from the gossip pages. They'd become ghosts in the same world they once tried to control. Sometimes I wondered if they ever saw the articles, if they watched the interviews. Maybe they did. Maybe they sat somewhere, scrolling through photos of the sister they'd dismissed and realizing too late that they'd created their own exile. But I didn't think about them much anymore. Instead, I poured my energy into the foundation. We built our first community housing complex 6 months later, a bright, modern space for families in need. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a little girl handed me a handmade card that read, "Thank you for helping my mom find a home." I hugged her, holding back tears. For the first time, I understood what true legacy meant. It wasn't about money or ownership, it was about impact. My father's name lived on, not through wealth, but through compassion. Later that day, a journalist asked if they could take a group photo with the volunteers and residents. Everyone gathered in front of the new building. They motioned for me to stand in the middle. As the camera clicked, I realized something profound. This was the family photo I had always wanted. Not built on blood, but on purpose. No one was left out. No one was cropped away. That evening, as I sat at home, I scrolled through the images from the day. In every single one, I was smiling genuinely, effortlessly. For once, the photos weren't painful reminders of absence. They were proof of belonging. I closed my laptop and looked around my quiet apartment. On the shelf beside my father's framed letter was that original Christmas photo, the one I'd once taped up, the one that had started it all. The space where I'd been missing was still there. I didn't need to fill it anymore, because I'd created something bigger than any family photo could hold. They took me out of their picture, so I built one they could never enter. I never meant for revenge to feel so heavy. When I first decided to protect my father's estate, I told myself it was about justice. About reclaiming what was rightfully his and mine. But as the dust settled and the noise died down, I began to realize something I hadn't expected. The victory felt heavier than the fight ever did. Revenge, as satisfying as it once sounded, doesn't leave you triumphant. It leaves you holding the weight of everything that broke you. For weeks after the lawsuit ended, I found myself waking early, sitting by my window with coffee, staring out at a quiet world that felt both peaceful and hollow. The chaos was gone, but so was the adrenaline that had carried me through it. My siblings were silent now. The phone no longer rang, and life had fallen still. That's when the responsibility began to sink in. The foundation, my father's final legacy, had become bigger than I anticipated. Every day brought new calls, new letters, new people looking for help. Families in need. Students applying for scholarships. Elderly women seeking housing. Each one reminded me that this not revenge was what all of it was meant for. So, I threw myself into the work. I started visiting the communities our program supported. I met single mothers trying to rebuild their lives, kids studying under dim streetlights but dreaming of college, and seniors who cried when they received stable housing. Every time I shook a hand or listened to a story, I could feel my father's presence, quiet, steady, proud. It was there, in those small moments, that I began to understand something deeper. Revenge had only restored my control, but responsibility was restoring my purpose. Kayla noticed the change before I did. One afternoon, she came to the foundation's new office and found me surrounded by stacks of paperwork. "You're working yourself to death," she said, dropping a sandwich on my desk. I smiled tiredly. "You sound like my mother." "She's not wrong," she said. "You're not at war anymore, Fee. You can breathe now." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. "I don't know how to, Kayla. For years, every step I took was about proving them wrong. Now I don't even think about them, and somehow, that scares me." She gave me a gentle look. "That's because you've spent your whole life fighting for space. You finally have it, and now you don't know what to do with the quiet." Her words stayed with me. That night, I went home and reread my father's last letter, the one he'd written for me before his death. "You'll know how to guide what I've built. Keep it safe from greed, from pride, and even from family." I realized he hadn't just trusted me with money. He'd trusted me with meaning. Over the next few months, I began to change how I approached the work. I stopped hiding behind logistics and started leading with empathy. I visited schools, hospitals, and shelters not as an administrator but as a listener. I met people, face to face, hearing their stories, feeling their gratitude. One afternoon, while speaking to a group of scholarship recipients, a girl named Mia raised her hand. "Miss Morgan," she asked shyly, "why do you do all this? Why give so much?" Her question caught me off guard. I paused, thinking carefully before answering. "Because," I said slowly, "someone once gave me the strength to stand up for what's right. And when you have that kind of strength, you don't keep it, you pass it on." The room was quiet for a moment, then they applauded softly. I smiled, but later that night, I cried. Not from sadness, just release. The girl's question had touched a place I'd buried under years of anger. Responsibility, I realized, was no longer something I carried for my father. It was something I carried for myself. Vanessa and Luke rarely crossed my mind anymore. On the rare nights they did, it wasn't with rage or resentment. Just distance. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. And while theirs had led to bitterness, mine had led to peace. My mother started visiting more often too. We'd have tea in the garden, where the hydrangeas bloomed brighter than ever. One evening, she looked at me and said, "Your father would be proud. You turned his memory into something alive." I smiled softly. "I just tried to do what he would have done." "No," she said. "You did more, you healed what he couldn't." That night, I stood in the garden long after she left, the cool wind brushing my face. I thought about everything I'd endured, every insult, every betrayal, every sleepless night, and I realized I wasn't carrying any of it anymore. I'd finally set it down. The revenge had burned itself out long ago. What remained was something steadier, like the foundation itself. Solid, enduring, purposeful. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I wasn't the invisible one. I was the woman who rebuilt her life from the ashes of family, agreed, and turned it into light for others. As I walked back into the house, I glanced at the photo on my mantel, my mother and my father from years ago. I wasn't cropped out of that one. I never would be again. I didn't lock them out for punishment, I did it to unlock my own peace. Even snakes shed their skin, but not all change lasts. It had been almost a year since the lawsuit, and my life had finally settled into something that resembled peace. The foundation was thriving. The scholarship program had doubled. And I was spending more time outdoors, gardening, reading, breathing without the weight of old memories pressing on my chest. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at my office door. I looked up from my desk, expecting to see one of the volunteers. Instead, it was her. Vanessa. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. She stood in the doorway, thinner than I remembered, her hair shorter, her makeup gone. The confident woman who once strutted into every room as if she owned it now looked like someone searching for a place to sit. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." She stepped inside, glancing around the office. The walls were lined with photos of the foundation's projects, families smiling in new homes, students in graduation gowns. Her eyes lingered on a framed picture of our father. "You've done a lot," she said softly. "I've tried," I replied. Silence stretched between us. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, the hum of the air conditioner, the sound of my own heartbeat. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't come here to fight. That's a first," I said before I could stop myself. She let out a small, humorless laugh. "I deserve that." I studied her face. She looked older, not just in years but in spirit. "Why are you here, Vanessa?" She took a deep breath. "Because I'm tired, Fiona. I've been angry for so long I don't even remember what started it. When Dad died, I told myself you stole something from me, but I think I was just angry that he trusted you more." Her honesty startled me. Vanessa had always been a master of deflection, of saying everything except the truth. "I didn't want to hurt you," I said quietly. "I just wanted to protect what he built." "I know that now," she said. "I see what you've done with the foundation. I've seen the news, the interviews, the donations. You didn't take from him, you carried him forward." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. There was a part of me that wanted to forgive her right there. But another part, the part that remembered every cruel comment, every exclusion, every manipulation, couldn't forget so easily. She seemed to sense that hesitation. "I'm not here for money," she added. "I'm not here to reopen anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile and unfamiliar coming from her mouth. I leaned back in my chair, watching her. "Do you mean that?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes, I was jealous of you, Fiona. I always have been. You were everything I wasn't disciplined, grounded, loved for the right reasons. I spent years trying to prove I was better, and when I couldn't, I tried to destroy you instead." Hearing it out loud made my chest ache. Not out of triumph, but out of sadness for what we could have been. "Vanessa," I said softly, "I can't forget what happened, but I can appreciate that you came here. It took courage." She nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I regret it." I studied her face one last time. She wasn't lying. For the first time, she wasn't hiding behind vanity or pride. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means something." She looked relieved, though her eyes stayed downcast. "If there's ever anything I can do to help the foundation," I smiled faintly. "Maybe one day, but not yet." She nodded again, wiped her tears, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. "You really were the better sister." "No," I said quietly. "I was just the one who stopped competing." She gave me a small, sad smile and left. When the door closed behind her, I sat still for a long time, letting the moment settle. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry, just calm. That night, as I drove home, I found myself thinking about her. Not the woman she was, but the girl we once were. The two sisters sitting in matching pajamas on Christmas morning, laughing without rivalry. Somewhere along the way, life had buried that version of us under jealousy and expectation. Maybe this visit was her way of digging a little piece of it back up. When I got home, I poured myself some tea and stepped out onto the porch. The evening sky was streaked with orange and violet, the kind of sunset my father used to love. I imagined him looking down at us that day, me and Vanessa, not fighting, just finally silent. I whispered, "I think you'd be proud of us, Dad. Maybe not for who we were, but for who we're trying to be." 2 days later, I received a donation to the foundation. It wasn't large, but it came with a note. From someone trying to start over. "Thank you for showing me what love looks like when it isn't selfish." No signature, but I knew who it was from. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Some things are better left quiet. Forgiveness doesn't always need to be loud, it just needs to exist. Forgiveness didn't mean reunion, it meant release. Some inherit money, others inherit meaning. A year after my father's passing, the house finally felt like home again. Not the house I grew up in, but the one I built for myself, the one filled with silence that didn't sting, where every corner held peace instead of tension. The world around me had changed, and so had I. The woman who once cried over being excluded from a photograph was long gone. In her place stood someone who understood that peace isn't given by others, it's something you create, brick by brick, the way my father once built his business. Every morning began the same way. I'd wake early, make coffee, and walk through the small garden behind my house. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, their soft blues and purples brushing against the sunlight. I'd pause there, breathing in the scent of wet soil, remembering how my father used to say, "You can't rush something worth growing." He was right. The foundation had become a living tribute to him. Each month brought another success, a family moving into affordable housing, a student earning a scholarship, a community center expanding. People began to associate the Morgan name not with wealth or scandal, but with kindness. That was the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Sometimes, volunteers or donors would stop by my office just to meet me. They'd say things like, "Your father must have been an incredible man," or, "You must be proud to continue his work." And I always smiled. Because I was. But what surprised me most was how the work changed me. It softened the parts of me that had hardened from years of resentment. It filled the empty space where revenge used to live with purpose and gratitude. Kayla noticed the difference too. She came by one Saturday, carrying pastries and a grin. "You've gone domestic," she teased. "Next thing I know, you'll be knitting sweaters for the entire neighborhood." I laughed. "I think Revenge Fiona would have burned the yarn before touching it." She smiled. "I like this version of you, you're lighter." "I think I finally learned that peace doesn't mean silence," I said. "It means knowing when the noise doesn't deserve your attention." That afternoon, we sat outside, drinking tea and watching the sunset. There was no talk of the past, just contentment. I'd still hear bits of news about Vanessa and Luke. Luke had started over in another city, working modestly in real estate. Vanessa's life had quieted too. Her business was gone. But I'd heard she'd begun volunteering at a local shelter. Maybe she'd finally found a version of peace too. I didn't hold bitterness anymore. There was nothing left to win, nothing left to lose. We were all just trying to live with the choices we'd made. One morning, while sorting through old boxes in my study, I found a family photo I hadn't seen in years. The one from the Christmas I was cut out of. The picture that started it all. For a long time, I just stared at it. The smiles were wide, the lighting perfect, but the energy in it felt hollow, forced. It was strange how a photograph that once shattered me now looked small, unimportant. Next to it, I placed a newer photo, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the community housing project. I was standing in the center, surrounded by volunteers, children, and smiling families. Two different photos, two different definitions of family. I slipped the old one back into the box and kept the new one on my desk. Later that evening, my mother came by for dinner. We cooked together, laughed about old memories, and avoided the heavier ones. When we finished, she looked around my house and said, "It feels peaceful here. Your father would have loved it." "I think he's here," I said softly. "Every time something good happens through the foundation, I feel him." She smiled. "Then I guess you built your own kind of estate." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I stood on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of loneliness or the pull of unfinished business. My life had become exactly what it needed to be, not a monument to loss but a celebration of survival. In a way, I realized I had inherited more than property or money. I had inherited my father's patience, his integrity, his quiet strength. That was the true estate, the one no one could contest or steal. The peace I had now wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come from revenge or victory. It came from knowing that I had taken pain and turned it into something beautiful, that I had chosen to build, not burn. I went back inside, lit a small candle, and whispered a quiet thank you to my father, to the universe, and even to the people who had once tried to break me. Because without them, I might never have discovered what I was capable of. Then I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and smiled at my reflection in the glass. They taught me that love without respect isn't family, it's just performance. They wanted me forgotten, but stories have a way of finding their audience. A few years have passed since everything unraveled, since my family broke apart, since my father's will became a courtroom battleground, since my name stopped being whispered in pity and started being spoken with respect. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges, but the lessons it leaves behind? Those stay carved in stone. When I look back now, it feels like I've lived several lifetimes. The quiet girl who was erased from her family photo died the day I decided to protect my father's legacy. In her place rose a woman who stopped apologizing for existing. The Morgan Foundation has become something bigger than I ever dreamed. It's no longer just about honoring my father, it's about building hope. We've funded dozens of community projects, opened shelters, granted scholarships, and helped rebuild entire neighborhoods. Every brick, every handshake, every tearful thank you reminds me that purpose is the only true revenge. One morning, I received an email from a journalist named Hannah Reynolds. She wanted to feature the foundation in a national magazine. At first, I hesitated. Public attention had never been my goal, but her message was different. It wasn't about wealth or scandal. It was about resilience. "I want to tell the story of how you turned betrayal into purpose," she wrote. "Not to sensationalize it, but to inspire others who've been broken by the people they trusted most. Something in her tone felt genuine, so I agreed. When Hannah arrived, she was warm and disarming, her notebook tucked under her arm. We sat in my office for hours, talking about everything from my childhood memories to the night I decided to take control of my father's estate. She asked questions no one had ever dared to ask before. "Do you hate them?" she asked softly. I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said. "Hate keeps you tied to the people who hurt you. I chose freedom." She smiled. "That's powerful." By the end of the interview, I felt lighter. It wasn't just about telling my story, it was about releasing it. A month later, the article was published. The title read, "The Daughter Who Protected Her Father's Legacy." I remember sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, scrolling through the piece line by line. It was honest, respectful, and above all true. The photographs showed me walking through the housing projects, talking with children, standing beside the plaque that bore my father's name. For once, my story wasn't being twisted by anger or greed. It was being told by someone who understood what it meant to survive with grace. The article went viral. My inbox filled with messages from people all over the country. Some were strangers thanking me for giving them courage. Others were women who'd fought similar battles with families, with inheritance, with silence. One message, though, stayed with me. It came from a woman named Lorraine. "Your story reminded me that being left out doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you're meant to build your own table." I printed that message and pinned it to the corkboard in my office. It became my reminder that what started as revenge had transformed into something that touched lives far beyond my own. The story also reached people I hadn't expected. One afternoon, my mother called. Her voice trembled with emotion. "I read the article," she said. "It made me cry. Your father would have been so proud." I swallowed hard. "Thank you, Mom. There's something else," she added softly. "Your sister called me. She saw it too." I froze. "Vanessa?" "Yes. She said it broke her heart, but in a good way. She told me to tell you that she's glad you found peace." For a long time, I said nothing. I didn't know whether to cry or smile. Maybe both. After we hung up, I sat quietly, thinking about everything that had brought me here. I remembered the Christmas I was left out of that photo, the pain of exclusion, the fire it ignited. Back then, I thought the only way to heal was to make them regret it. But I'd been wrong. Healing came when I stopped needing their regret at all. Now, when people ask me how I did it, how I managed to turn so much pain into progress, I tell them the truth. I didn't do it by fighting harder, I did it by letting go. One evening, I visited my father's grave. The grass was neatly trimmed, the stone clean. I knelt down, running my fingers over his name. Beside it, I placed a small, framed photo. It was that Christmas photo, the one they took without me. I'd kept it all these years, not out of spite, but as a reminder of where I began. I set it gently against the headstone and whispered, "We finally made it, Dad. You and I." The wind rustled through the trees, soft and familiar, almost like his voice. As I stood to leave, I felt no bitterness, no sorrow, just peace. The story was complete. I walked back to my car, the evening sun stretching long shadows across the grass. I knew my family might never fully understand the woman I'd become, and that was okay. I didn't build this life to prove anything to them. I built it to honor love, legacy, and truth, the things they once overlooked. And maybe, someday, when they hear my name or see a headline about the foundation, they'll remember the sister they once left out of the picture and realize she became the story they never wanted told. They erased me from their memories, but I became the legacy they could never erase.